Hi, I'm A.D. Lewis, and welcome back to my channel for another Dracula review. Before we get started, make sure you hit that like, that subscribe button with the little bell so you get notifications of my new videos. Is there anything else? Oh, and please leave a comment, especially with what we're going to talk about on this episode of my Dracula reviews. So, if you have any questions, comments, you want to talk about your favorite adaptation, because this time we are doing Adaptations again, and I'm not wearing my Dracula outfit or my cape for this video. It's just a little hot, and as you can see, I'm in a tank top, so that definitely tells you how hot, how warm it is. And it's also my Cthulhu one. It's a little big. I got it for Christmas or Yuletide. So we're my Cthulhu. Little cosmic horror. So, let's get started, because I've got a lot to talk about, and I have a whole page of notes here. So I'm going to be referring to it a lot, because I have to keep on track of what, what's what, because there's a lot here. Okay, so, we've talked about books, like the novel Dracula, and and Dracula, and the short story Dracula's Guest by Bram Stoker, and we've talked about the Universal Studios and the play, and we talked about the Coppola film and the novelization. So we've talked about books and movies, short stories, or a short story. Now we're going to talk more about movies, and these are the other, literally this one, as you can see, is episode 7, or part 7, of the Dracula reviews, which is the other Draculas. Now, there are other adaptations, of course, but I have selected 4 main ones I'm going to be talking about, and the 5th one is a bonus, which I don't know as much about, but I thought it bared mentioning. So, let's get started. I also don't have extra lighting this time around, because I didn't want glare on my glasses, nor on these covers, so hopefully I've got that worked out. So, we're going to start with Horror of Dracula from 1958, which is this one right here. There's not too much glare. So this one is actually, clearly it's a set. I actually only have these 2 Draculas on here. The disc that contains these was ruined, and unfortunately, in an accident, and I actually have this one in another set, and I replaced this one. So, we're talking about this one, 1958. Horror of Dracula, starring Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, and horror legend Michael Gough, who you may know also as Alfred in the Tim Burton Batman film and the Batman films that followed in the 90s. Now, this film was originally called Dracula, and it was during the time in the late 1950s when Hammer decided to focus more on horror, and they started basically remaking Universal Studios classics. So they started with Dracula, which actually you can get a pretty good image from the film right there. Well, it comes out kind of blurry. It's not focusing very well. That's Christopher Lee right there in the role. Of course, this was his first outing as Dracula, and in many ways, it's closer to the novel than the Bela Lugosi film is. So, like I said, it's the first Hammer Dracula. It's one of the few where Dracula actually has, lines, because there's some Draculas he doesn't have lines, some he may only have, like, 1 line in the entire film. So, he refused to say the lines in the second film he was in, which was the 3rd in the series, called Dracula, Prince of Darkness, because he wanted to, speak the Stoker lines from the novel. And of course, that's not what they wrote. So anyway, in this one, it kind of goes along with the whole Jonathan Harker's coming to Dracula's castle to be his librarian instead of, basically a real estate agent and lawyer, So, there's that. And it starts out with the whole diary thing, but that soon gets dropped from the entire thing. Because it starts out, from the diary of Jonathan Harker. It starts with a little narration, then we get a little bit more as he sits down to write, and then we get nothing after that. The diary is seen and retrieved. Jonathan Harker does meet a mysterious girl. I'm going to go ahead and spoil this. It's a vampire. Instead of 3 vampire women, like in the novel, we have 1, and she does try to seduce him, and she is reprimanded by Dracula himself. And there's dang flies. I've been battling these flies. They keep getting in from out in the hallway of the building, so I've been battling them all day. But we soon find out that Jonathan Harker is not actually there to be Dracula's librarian. He's actually there to kill Dracula because he knows Dracula's a vampire, and he is actually working with Van Helsing. He ultimately fails. Van Helsing comes along, finds out Jonathan's fate, and retrieves the diary, goes back to Kossenberg, because we're not in London in this adaptation at all. It takes place in Kossenberg, where he goes to Jonathan Harker's fiancée and her family, which is Arthur Holmwood and Mina, his wife, because in this version, Jonathan Harker is engaged to Lucy. And they've made Lucy and Arthur siblings, and Mina's married him, and Dr. Seward does have a brief walk-on cameo. He's just a regular doctor. He's not really involved, except for he is treating Lucy, who is, you know, ailing from a mysterious sickness. Like I said, we don't get the whole London thing, and Arthur Holmwood and Van Helsing start working together. So, and Van Helsing in this is very English. He's not really, he's not Dutch. Not in this adaptation at all, which is, it's rather strange, but Peter Cushing does a great job in this role, so. And it's a character he continues to play on and off throughout the Dracula series for Hammer Films. And the death scene for Dracula is rather interesting. The special effects are not so great, but it was 1958, and from what I understand, there was some of that footage cut because it was considered a little too gruesome. So, anyway, number 2, and I'm going to be going through these as quickly as possible, so I can't cover everything. Number 2 is Count Dracula from 1970. Here in the States, though, it was sometimes referred to as Bram Stoker's Count Dracula. It is directed by Jesus Franco. By the way, Horror of Dracula was directed by Terence Fisher, who directed a lot of Hammer films. Anyway, so this one was directed by Jesus Franco. And this is the second DVD edition. There was an earlier one that had a lot of cool special features. This one doesn't have as cool special features. It included also an abridged version of the audiobook performed by Christopher Lee himself. So Christopher Lee actually finally gets to play Dracula as Bram Stoker had written him. Well, except for the sunlight thing, which seems to reoccur in every one of these films. Sunlight, you know, in every one of these ones we're talking about, sunlight is fatal to vampires, whereas in the novel, it was not. So we also get Herbert Lom playing Van Helsing, and he played the Phantom in the Hammer film from 1964 version of Phantom of the Opera. And we have Klaus Kinski, who would later on play the part of Dracula in the remake of Nosferatu in 1979. He's playing here Renfield, who does not speak a word, but he has an incredible performance. This one is sometimes considered to be rather dull. I actually rather like this one. There are some rather cheap moments, though, and we are, again, not in London. So Jonathan Harker goes and he does his traditional thing. He's a lawyer. He's going to speak to Dracula to, you know, sell him some real estate. He gets trapped in the castle, and there are the 3 vampire women. And it holds up pretty well with the novel up to a point, until Jonathan escapes from Castle Dracula, and he is a patient now at Van Helsing's, Dr. Van Helsing's, mental institution, where Dr. Seward is just kind of a doctor who's kind of there. He doesn't really do much, so he's not a big part of the plot. There's no Quincy P. Morris in this one. He is combined with Arthur Holmwood in this adaptation, and this is one of the closest adaptations to the novel, if you remove the Coppola film, for sure, and the 1977 miniseries, which I spoke about in the first video, briefly, on the original novel. This is also one of the first, if not the first, I'm not sure on this point, where Dracula ages backwards. You know, as he drinks blood, he starts becoming younger and younger, which what they do is, Christopher Lee, they gave him the mustache just like in the novel, and his hair is white. And as he gets younger, his hair color changes. But anyway. So, like, most of the action takes place in the asylum where Arthur Holmwood and Lucy and Mina come, and they stay there and stuff, and Lucy becomes the victim of Dracula. So again, we don't have London, like I said. Also, Vincent Price was originally slated to play the part of, from what I understand anyway, play the part of Van Helsing, but he was unavailable, so they got Herbert Lom. Interesting thing is, every time I've watched this since I found that information out, I always, which has only been a couple times since I found that out, I listen to his lines, and I try to imagine, and I think I can do it pretty well, I can hear how Vincent Price would have delivered the lines. And he knows about Dracula, and he's kind of, you know, been looking for him and stuff, so he's already aware of Dracula's existence. And once he hears about Dracula, then he suddenly starts to believe, so, you know, Jonathan Harker's not crazy. And they do defeat Dracula in a similar way to Horror of Dracula. But, anyway. It's interesting. I can't tell too much about it without spoiling it, but I would recommend seeing it. It's a little cheap at times, but, you know, it was 1970. It's a foreign release. It's from Europe. I actually really like it. I would consider it highly recommended if you're interested in, you know, adaptations of Dracula. Next, we have our third selection, and that is the Dan Curtis Dracula, starring Jack Palance from 1974. Now, originally, this was released as Bram Stoker's Dracula, and the early VHS versions all say that. Unfortunately, when the Coppola film came about, they purchased the rights to that title, and so it had to be called Dan Curtis's Dracula. While you're watching the movie, though, it still says on the title card, Bram Stoker's Dracula, but if you go on the... Last time I watched this, I actually went on the scene selection. I don't know why I did that, but I noticed something interesting on the little thumbnails in the scene selection. It says Dan Curtis's Dracula during the title sequence on the thumbnails, but when you watch the scene, it doesn't say that. So I thought that was really weird. This one was actually penned by Richard Matheson, who's directed many horror films and who is also a horror writer, famous for writing specifically I Am Legend. You know, the sci-fi horror vampire plague story. He also wrote films. He wrote the original adaptation for that called Last Man on Earth. He wrote the TV film Trilogy of Terror, also directed by Dan Curtis, and based off of 3 of his short stories. And he directed several Vincent Price, Edgar Allan Poe films, and other non-Edgar Allan Poe Vincent Price films as well, such as Master of the World. So anyway, this one is kind of the first one to really depict Dracula as a love story. So we have Dracula, you know, and Dan Curtis does actually say this in an interview, that, and it's quite obvious when you're watching it, they quite literally rip off Dark Shadows, and he even admits it, yes, we ripped off Dark Shadows for this, because Dan Curtis thought the whole idea about Dracula coming from Transylvania to England just because he sucked the, you know, all the life out and the blood of the countryside around him, you know, drank all the blood, you know, sucked all the life out of it, and so he's coming to London, you know, to continue living and, you know, drinking blood. That's kind of silly, so they rewrote it as the reason why he's coming to England is because he is aware of his true love's reincarnation. So so Lucy is the reincarnation of his dead wife. This is also one of the earliest films to depict Dracula as Prince Vlad of Wallachia. So this was one of the first films to make that connection. It is a TV movie, but I think it's still recommended. It is it seems rather long, and it does have a lot of things in common with, you know, the Coppola film, you know, the reincarnation thing of the dead wife. so on and so forth, except for it's Lucy. It stars Jack Palance and Nigel Davenport, and also Simon Ward, who had been in at least one Hammer film. It was a Hammer Frankenstein film. I don't know if it was before this or just after it, but it was the last one in the Frankenstein series. And in some ways, it's one of the closer ones to the novel. It's not the closest, but it is a closer version to the novel, for sure. And it's... I'm not really sure what I was about to say. I kind of lost my thought, but that's okay. But Jack Palance does a great job. That's one of the reasons why this one is so famous. He does a fantastic job in the role of Dracula, and he actually was asked to play Dracula several times after that, and he refused. He was also the inspiration. His look was the inspiration for the Tomb of Dracula, the look of Tomb of Dracula, the Marvel Comics series, comic book series. So they used his likeness basically as the inspiration for how they designed what Dracula looked like in their comics. So that was really cool. This was actually the second time that Jack Palance actually joined forces with Dan Curtis for a production, because the first one was in 1968. It was The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Sorry, gotta pronounce that name correctly, though I don't think anybody really cares. Which is actually my favorite adaptation of that novel, even though it follows basically kind of the 1932 version, rewriting the story, but it's still one of my favorites. So there was that one. Like I said, we got to go through this really quickly because I don't want this video to take, forever. So, our fourth one, which is our last main one, is from 2012. It is Argento's Dracula, directed by, Italian horror aficionado and auteur director Dario Argento. This one is not one of my favorite Dario Argento films. This is the second Dario Argento film I ever saw, and it actually kind of tainted me against Dario Argento until I got to watch, got reintroduced and got to watch some of his earlier, better films in my horror films class. Which even my professor, when I told him during our midterm, which was an oral exam, we didn't have to do a writing exam, we just had to come in and talk about film and reference the reading material. So it was, kind of like giving an oral essay. And it was just random questions. So we had to know all the material, and it was kind of nerve-wracking for me to do something like that. But I told him about my first outing with Dario Argento, my first two, and his reaction was, oh no. Because it was two of his not-so-great films. This one, and his Phantom of the Opera. Not the movie Opera, but his Phantom of the Opera from the early 90s. Which, in my opinion, and I've heard other people agree, it is absolutely terrible. So I do not recommend it. I actually don't really recommend this one, although there are some interesting things with this one that's a little different. So, I thought the acting was rather stiff in this film. Which, for me, it made it hard to watch. Also, this is one of the goriest Dracula films I have ever seen. I've seen Dracula do some really hideous things in this film, especially in this one scene in particular. Before I go on with any more information about, about the film itself, this stars Thomas Kretschmann. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name right, but he also plays Van Helsing in the NBC Dracula TV series, which I really liked, and I'm so sad that it got canceled, but I really love that show, and I've watched the show several times over. Asia Argento, Dario Argento's daughter, and Rutger Hauer, the late Rutger Hauer, who plays Van Helsing, and he does a great job. Asia Argento plays Lucy, and Thomas Kretschmann, I know I'm probably butchering his name, he plays Dracula, which is ironic because he plays Van Helsing in the TV series. So, this one kind of follows Jonathan Harker, again, coming to Dracula as a librarian, but he doesn't have an ulterior motive this time, so it seems like they took some inspiration from the Hammer films a little bit. Dracula's terrorizing this town a little bit that he's staying in, but he also has helped the town, so he's terrorizing it, but nobody knows, hardly anyone knows why. There are some that do know, but they're keeping their mouths shut. He has actually made this town rich and stuff, so he's put this town on the map. But the reason why Jonathan Harker is brought there to be his librarian, he has an ulterior motive, because he, again, we have the whole love story aspect. Dracula has discovered that, his lost love, who died 400 years ago, is reincarnated as Mina, Jonathan Harker's fiancé. I don't think they're married in this one. They might be married in this one. So, he goes after, he brings Jonathan there to lure her there, and Jonathan has an unfortunate fate. And this one has Dracula turn into... the special effects are not great, but Dracula does have some really bizarre transformations in this one. He transforms... A couple of his... he becomes the smoke creature at one point. He's this giant praying mantis, which is really freaky, and he's this huge white owl. So, I've never seen transformations like this in a Dracula film, and the other time I can think of a really bizarre transformation is in the book, Draculas, which was the last book I reviewed in the Dracula, this Dracula review series, where he transforms into, I think it was a swarm of bees, and it was really freaky in that scene. So I'm not really a huge fan of this. I've only watched it a couple times, maybe 3 at the most. Now that I'm doing this review and overview of these, I'm actually planning on getting rid of this. Rutger Hauer was one of the one of the few redeeming, not really saving graces, redeeming things about this film, because I just absolutely loved him. Asia does a great job too. But Rutger Hauer comes into it rather late, and so he doesn't have too much to do with the plot. And this is one of the few times I've actually seen him play a good guy. And he's been involved in other vampire projects, such as Buffy the Vampire Slayer from 1992. I think it was the 2004 Salem's Lot, I think it was 2004, miniseries with Rob Lowe. And he played in the 3rd Dracula 2000 movie, which I think is called Legacy. I'm not sure, but he played Dracula in that, so he's played Dracula-esque roles, and he's also played Van Helsing, so... excuse me, I'm not going to keep this movie. I'm actually going to get rid of it, because I'm not a fan of it. So. And lastly, here's our bonus. I don't know much about this one, so we're not going to spend as much time. And it is Dracula, Pages from a Virgin Diary from 2003. So we're stepping back about 10 years. 9 years, sorry. It is directed by Guy Maddin. It is a ballet film based upon the Royal Winnipeg Ballet production of Dracula. It's in black and white and color. It is silent, but with music, and there are some title cards that pop on. It's kind of like a silent movie that's also a ballet. It's really bizarre, kind of erotic, and dreamlike. Kind of like, a German Expressionist film. Which actually, this quote on the front cover actually sums it up really pretty well. Quick-witted and dazzling, imagine Murnau's Nosferatu remade by Kenneth Anger, edited by Eisenstein on a cocaine binge, and produced by Masterpiece Theater, and that is Nathan Lee, New York Sun, that said that, and I think that sums it up perfectly. Because I've only watched this once. This one I'm willing to watch again. It's just bizarre. When I started watching it, I was just like, what am I watching? And I just kind of bought it on a whim because I had actually heard my professor, who I had for a lot of my film classes, before he was my professor, I actually went to a lecture he had at the public library, and he was talking about vampires and zombies in film and literature, and this was one film he highly recommended, and it is bizarre. I would definitely watch it again. I just wasn't sure what I was getting myself into, but I got it at a flea market, actually, for not too bad a price, and it's different. It is different. I can't say much about it because I don't know as much about this one. I've only seen it one time, whereas the other ones I've seen at least twice. Most of those other ones I've seen several times. But this one I would definitely watch again, whereas the Argento one, I don't really have plans to watch it a third/4th time. So, anyway. That is the other Draculas. We've talked about 5 Draculas. Let me quickly review what they were. 1958, Horror of Dracula, which actually the title card for the original UK release, done with its Gothic script, is so much more stylish than the very bland title card that they used for the US release. And you can actually look at the difference on YouTube. You can just check out the title card for the 1958 Hammer film of Dracula. 1970s Count Dracula. 1974's Dan Curtis's Dracula. 2012's Argento's Dracula. And finally, 2003's Dracula, Pages from a Virgin's Diary. So that is it for Dracula episodes, the Dracula Reviews, episode 7, the other Draculas, where we looked at 5 Dracula films. I hope to see you next time, and, stay safe, stay cool, and, stay healthy, you know, and help others to stay healthy, too. So, anyway, that's all I've got, and I will see you guys next time for another review. Take care, bye-bye.